This is an excellent book if you're just getting started making electronic oscillators, or if you want to get into making electronic instruments, synthesizers, oscillators, things like that, even effects pedals, guitar effects pedals. This is an excellent book. And in it, let's see, I bought this book about 18 years ago, right around when I was first getting started with electronics. And it was first published, I think the first published copies were in 2006. That's right around the time when I bought it. And this is a great book for beginners because he goes over, in the first few chapters, he goes over, he being the author, Nikolas Collins. He goes over basic things like how to solder and basic schematic symbols, and how to use certain sensors with basic circuits like the piezo disc, how to wire things together. Also, this is really what he's teaching is the basics of circuit bending, how to modify existing things like battery operated synthesizers and audio toys to make new experimental instruments. And so he goes over the basics, electronic basics, some really interesting ideas of using things that you could salvage. Like here is the tape head from a tape recorder. I've never done this, but it's a very interesting ideas. And so it's filled with all kinds of interesting ideas, and he teaches you the basic of electronics. Here's a potentiometer, and he's teaching Ohm's law, circuits in parallel and circuits in series, and he gets into photo-resistors, pressure pads, and how to wire certain things to potentiometers, how to make contact sensors. And if you're getting started, this is a great book to start learning with. Let's see, yeah, there you go. There's like a toy keyboard that you, he shows different techniques of modifying toy keyboards, what they call toy keyboards. And they're really, you know, battery operated electronic audio. And okay, here's in his first circuit, he gets right into how to make a very simple synthesizer. So it's an oscillator which uses a one potentiometer. It's the potentiometer, the pot, is being used as a variable resistor. And he shows you the basic symbols. This is the chip we're using. It's a Schmitt hex inverter or Schmitt trigger chip. It's the one I'm using is 74C14, but you could also use a 4093. And in the book he explains, he details certain alternatives to the 74 C14. And basically it's a, it's easy to use because you could power it with a 9-volt battery, and it's very easy to use. And then he shows, after you build the basic circuit, he shows how to modify it by adding photo-resistors, different value capacitors, and he goes on from there. So I'm going to build the circuit up on a breadboard, and if you don't know how to use a breadboard, they're very easy to use. It might look complicated because of all the little holes and everything, but it's actually a very logical way of connecting circuits. And if you don't know how to use a breadboard, there's a lot of different tutorials online about how to use an electronic breadboard to build circuits. And I think he goes into it as well. Yeah, actually, I'm pretty sure he does. It's been a few years since I've opened this book. But he does. He goes into how to use a breadboard to build your circuits. And the first circuit is a very easy one. It's actually this one here. And I have it made on a board. Okay, so that's the book. And actually he came out with a new edition, a new book, also called Handmade Electronic Music. And in the new book, I was just reading about it last night. In the new book, they also use, they show the use of using microcontrollers, the Arduino, and some other things. So I'm definitely going to buy that new book to see what other ideas he has in there. And this is a great book to get started. So here's the circuit already made on the breadboard. And this is the Schmidt trigger chip. And that's the 74C14. And this is a 0.1 microfarad capacitor. And this is a 100K potentiometer, just wired up as a variable resistor. So you have a potentiometer, a capacitor, an output jack. I'm using a 1/4-inch output jack to go into an amplifier. But you could also use the 1/8, the smaller 1/8 output jack. You know, I guess to go into, you could plug it into your computer or plug it into a smaller type of amplifier. 9-volt battery, and I added an LED with a resistor. So that's the basic circuit that he starts out with, and it makes, I mean, it's a great oscillator to get started with. I'm going to turn on the amplifier. And I'm going to adjust the potentiometer. So already you're starting out with a decent sounding oscillator. And an oscillator is the main building block to a synthesizer. And then of course you could add filters, filter circuits, and things like that to actually make a what would be recognized as a very basic synthesizer. But that's not bad for just handful of components. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to show how to add certain components like a photoresistor, and what happens when you change the value of the capacitor here. Because this capacitor controls basically the range of the frequencies. And if you were to use a smaller value capacitor, you get frequencies in the upper range. You would get high frequencies. And if you used a larger value capacitor, like this one here, this is a 0.47 microfarad electrolytic capacitor. If you were to use one of these, you would get a lower range of frequencies. And I remember making this circuit years ago, and I wanted to see what was the lowest value capacitor I could use. I used a very low value, I think it was a 100 microfarad capacitor. Sorry, I was saying low value, I meant high value. And it produced pulsing sounds, which I thought were really cool. And one of the things you could do is you could wire up different value capacitors on a rotary switch, so that you could choose each different capacitor and mess around with its frequency range. So next I'm going to add a photo cell, a photoresistor, and we're going to see how that, in combination with the pot, and you could get some really interesting Theremin-like effects where you're using like a light source. You know, I have two lights here, where you're using a light source in your hand to change the frequency of the sound. So I'm going to do that next. That's going to be part 2.